Okay, so first of all, I swear there is nothing scary about this video except my face. No scary images, no jump scares. So let's get right into it. When we look at horror films, many a times people think that horror is a crass genre, and it used to be true for a long time. But horror itself has always played an important role when it comes to cinema, interpreting the subconscious conditions of humanity in general. And each character or each monster in any horror film, I'm talking about supernatural monsters at the moment, have originated from different fears suppressed within the human body or within humanity as a whole. So let's look at all these monsters that we have come to know and love and hate and be scared of, and see what we find out about what they really mean. So I think the first most important trope that we absolutely have to explore is the woman as a ghost or a monster. Now the fact is that we are scared of things that we cannot accept in society, and one of the conditions that are created in the patriarchal world that we live in is that the woman or the feminine is suppressed and oppressed and repressed. So as the world stands, most cultures are patriarchal, and hence a woman who is liberated is considered a threat. Now when this threat becomes exaggerated and takes the shape of a monster, a ghost as we see them in Hollywood or Bollywood or any other film industry in the world, especially Japanese, these female ghosts are formed from the fear of the feminine energy that is repressed in society. Now the fact is that sexuality, when shown in a man, is considered machismo or a good thing or his prowess, but when it exists in a woman, it is considered bad and evil. Sexual perversion or sexuality in general is considered something connected to Satan or the devil or evil forces. So a woman who is sexually deviant or does not conform to the norms of society will have a direct connection to Satan. Now, this is why we'll see so many women getting possessed in films over and over again. You'll find that female ghosts are often scarier than male counterparts, because the fact is that as a society, we are scared of the liberated feminine, and the scary face of the liberated feminine comes and shows us what it can do when you watch The Conjuring or The Ring. But before we talk about characters in films, let's consider where we started, especially in Indian cinema. So the first few horror films that came out, like Mahal 1949, these were about a woman waiting for her lover to return. So a sad ghost who just walks the palace hallways. Now the reason for this was, at the time, film in general was very sad. It was a lot of poverty being shown, a lot of sadness and hope within that sadness. This was an effect of the partition which had transpired very recently at the time. And so there was a lot of sadness and a lot of hopelessness. So A Woman Goes Too was at this time sad and waiting for her lover who will never return, because that's kind of what India and Pakistan were going through at the same time. There was a point where Wo Kaun Thi came out. It wasn't a horror film, it was a psychological thriller. And the woman was shown in a white sari pretending to be a ghost. And I think this is where the urban legend of a woman in a white sari with a candle originated. In Wo Kaun Thi, interestingly, the woman had already become a sexual deviant. She was considered characterless, or a similar word used in the film to describe the woman who poses as a ghost. Moving on, in the 70s, the Ramsay brothers turned the woman into a sexual object for the first time. This was a direct effect of war or the conditions in the country which were post-colonial, but the partition hangover had passed at this point and people were suffering on their own. So they needed a place of liberation in the form of entertainment horror. And this sexual aggression that we saw on screen, it's kind of the perfect representation of humans and the way our sexual nature often collides with our aggressive nature. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out the difference between aggression and sexuality, and these films were blurring that line where a woman who is a sexual object is attacked by a monster. But in 1992, Ram Gopal Verma kind of turned the tables with Raat. And in Raat, we saw for the first time a woman being possessed by another woman. In this case, the ghost was the ghost of a wayward woman who has lost her way, who is sexually deviant. And so she has to be suppressed by the end because she's an evil force. Most of these horror films often suppress the woman or the female spirit or ghost at the end because she has done something which somehow stands against society's norms. For example, in The Conjuring, Bathsheba Sherman is the ghost, or she is a non-human spirit. I'm actually not sure what that film was talking about, trying to give scientific terms to things that don't actually exist. She, in her time, was someone who said that this is my land and nobody can have it. And going back to the original story of Bathsheba, I think she lost her child and people basically said that she killed her child. So she was considered the antithesis of a mother. The mother, which is the highest role given to a woman in a society, and this woman who goes completely against it. So she is considered a monster because she's liberated, she wants the right to her property, and she does not care about motherhood. The interesting thing is, by the end of the film, the woman she possesses is actually brought out after a failed exorcism. She is brought back to reality by reminding her of her role as a mother. And that's what the film considers a good Christian, someone who plays their role in society, in the heteronormative spirit of the society. In this context, it's very important to consider Japanese ghosts because Japanese spirits and ghosts are very different from the rest of the world in the sense that they have a more scary quality to them. At least that's how I see them. Like the Yurei in Ring or Ringu. In Ringu it was Sadako, and in the Ring you remember Samara. And the same happens in The Grudge, where we have another female ghost who is tormented by her rage and she's tormenting others. The specific quality of these Japanese spirits is that there is no end to them. There is no way to escape them. Their horror continues, their terror continues. And this kind of reflects on Japanese society, which is known for its repression, especially when it comes to women. So women in Japanese society are, of course, victims of this oppression and repression. So the scarier something is, you know that there is that much repression behind that spirit or ghost or monster. Now let's talk about the child as a monster. So I think one of the scariest examples is again Ringu, where Sadako is the monster. Then there's also Sinister, where the children are the monsters but they are reporting to a bigger monster. In Ringu, what's important to consider that the ghost is not just a child, it is also a female ghost. So you can consider it the scariest form of monster in society because two of the most repressed forms of humanity are children and women. Children are repressed because the adults around them are repressed and they are never allowed to fully come out, experience their whole selves. And hence, the child in a horror film is always a scary sight. Children are creepy because children represent the parts of ourselves we could not explore in childhood, our lost potentials, our repressed selves we have left behind as children. So overall, the child is probably the most repressed character in society. So the child as a ghost is always the creepiest element to add to a story. The innocent face of a child is the scariest bit because it is unimaginable to us that something that looks so innocent and tiny can hurt us, and God knows in what big ways. That's why the moment the innocent face turns into something scary, like in say Annabelle, I think one of those films, I'll put the poster here, you see the child's face turn into a monster, and the moment that happens, the child is kind of not as scary anymore. The doll as a monster is kind of an extension of the child as a monster, except that the doll carries two things. Firstly, it carries innocence, the innocence of childhood, and the possibility of perversing and turning that innocence into something savage. And secondly, it is inanimate. That's the part of dolls that is most scary because they are so human-like, but they are not human. Their inhumanity is what makes them the perfect vessel for fear, especially when they just randomly appear around a house in places where they are not supposed to be. Now let's consider zombies, and I'm going to count The Last of Us in this category as well, because yes, they are cordyceps and they are the infected and they are called all these other things, but they are basically zombies the same way Walking Dead has zombies or Train to Busan has zombies, because ultimately zombies are diseased people who carry diseases. So zombies represent the fear of disease in human beings. But what I really love about zombie shows and zombie films is that ultimately they all preach one common theme, which is working together and saving humanity at all costs. This is very interesting because all of us have lived through a pandemic at this point, and we know how it is to cut people off, to alienate ourselves, to try and save ourselves, and how it is to get help from other people or not get help at the moment we need it. And this all surrounds a disease that we are scared will come and kill us. That is exactly the fear that all these films and shows have been exploring, and they have reiterated over and over again that the only way to survive is to care about others, ultimately not worry about your own life so much and make sacrifices. Shows like The Walking Dead, of course, tell you that at the end of the day, working together, living together as a society is what makes us a civilization, without which, if we were scared of each other, we would fall apart. And if you want to explore more about The Walking Dead, here's my video about it. Somewhere, I don't know which, somewhere, you'll see it. Now consider houses as monsters. Of course, most horror films take place inside a big creepy house or a small creepy cottage, something creepy, an enclosed space of some sort. Yes, the scariness of a house of course comes from a large closed space which does not allow a lot of light to enter, which can shut its doors on you anytime and you could be the only person there as far as you know. But in recent years, a good theme that has developed around a haunted house is generational trauma. This is what you see in The Haunting of the Hill House. This is what you see in Bhootkalam. It is also something you'll see in 1408. The Haunting of Hill House talks about grief and it talks about mental illness passed down a family and what it does to a family, of course. Bhootkalam is about misunderstanding the family and how it creates a horrific environment until you open up to each other and then you can fight monsters no matter what they are. So at the end of the day, many of these films will tell you that houses carry the burden of tragedies that have happened in them. And basically these tragedies are just failings of human beings that have lived there before. Failures that the future generations are challenged with getting past. But in most cases, nobody gets past those challenges and they just move out of that haunted house. So they carry their baggage with them, but they just move out. Which just means that baggage and trauma will always exist in any family, and we just have to live on with that. Now consider technology as a monster, as we have seen it in The Ring or 2001: A Space Odyssey. Technology, of course, is something that humans created, and now we are constantly scared that it is something that will devour us. A science fiction concept, of course, which was probably brought about for the first time by Mary Shelley when she created Frankenstein's monster. And it was the first time that we saw technology hurting us after we created it. And since then the theme has carried on into the Terminator films, and interestingly my camera stopped recording just as I was talking about the horrors of technology, and I did not realize it until I finished recording the video. So that's fun. I think that pretty much sums up why we are so scared of technology and how it creates horror in our lives. Now interestingly, of course, today there are horror films which are exploring new genres, new kinds of trauma. There's Jordan Peele and there's Ari Aster who are exploring themes like grief and racism. But I think ultimately, and this is a theory of mine, feel free to try it out or throw it out of the window, I feel like somewhere the kind of horror that scares us defines the parts of us that are repressed. So I think if you, like me, are a slightly repressed woman who hasn't reached her full potential that the society does not allow her to reach, you will be scared of female monsters on screen. If your family dynamics are scary and your family is repressed, you might be scared of a deviant family film like, say, a Psycho. Tell me what kind of monsters really scare you, and let's talk about whether or not it really represents our oppression and our repression as we know it, and put it down in the comments. And yes, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a like, and I will see you next time. Bye.